Sorry. Sorry. And I hear the choir high up in the loft singing high mass. And I feel the body of devotion of the people in the pews as one. And a few years later, in a turbulent time of adolescent questioning, I tear off my golden crucifix and chain that my father had scraped and saved to buy me and cast it away on the tarmac of the church parking lot, unable to accept the doctrine of original sin, and headed out alone on my search for what is real and true. And then at 17 at college, I met the Sufis. And one day I was watching a Sufi woman perform a sacred temple dance from a very old hidden Sufi school in Central Asia. My conscious mind was intrigued by the movements, but some previously to me unknown part of me rises up and out of me to observe and to download some spiritual teaching preserved in that dance. I decide I want to live as this part of myself. And then in my early 20s, I met a Sufi school to study the sacred movements more. And there I meet Jalaluddin Loris, who was to become my teacher for a lifetime. I meet his father, the Mevlevi saint Suleiman Hayati Dede, then the Sheikh of Konya, Turkey, the place of Rumi. And Dede brought the whirling dervish ceremony to the West. And in his presence, I hear the sound of sounds, which I was to contemplate for decades. A sound one hears internally, and it stirs something that makes me want to rise and dance. And in this sound, I could feel this humble man's orientation toward God. He seemed to stand in the vastness, feeling deeply, personally, totally loved by God and totally loving God. And in his presence, I could register this in my being, like love and beauty breaking into openness every moment. And here we are, 40 plus years later, and these feet and this body are still called to dance in prayer. I still sometimes return to my roots in the Gurdjieff tradition for the sacred movements. And also for a couple decades, I led the dances of universal peace of the Shisti Sufi tradition with friends on Oahu. And then for over 40 years, my husband and I have been teaching the Mevlevi whirling to people in Hawaii, the mainland, and sometimes Europe and the Middle East. Our teacher passed away this past December, and we're carrying the torch as best we are given to do into the next generation. And so my dancing feet, well, they're well worn by now, but still serviceable. So these three Sufi traditions, let's take a brief look at the different sorts of use of dance as a spiritual practice. So the sacred movements, which are also part of the so-called Fourth Way, were collected by George Gurdjieff. And Renee, you might put up the picture, the first picture that we were talking about. Gurdjieff was of Greek and Armenian parentage, and he grew up in the late 1800s. The Russian army took Kars, the city where he was born, from Turkey at that time. There was a mass emigration that happened before the invasion, and then Russia forcibly moved a large number of ethnic groups of people into the city, people who previously had been geographically pretty isolated. And what that meant for Gurdjieff was a childhood spent on the brink of a new age, a time when chaos was at work, in a city where almost everyone was new and trying to preserve their ways. He grew up surrounded by ancient wisdom, and when he alone crossed the lines visiting these various groups, he happened to have a lovely high singing voice, and that was his ticket in. He was welcomed by all. But the strange behavior and customs that he witnessed led him to search for explanations. And the question that formed in his mind was, what is the sense and significance of life on the earth in general, and of human life in particular? He attracted a group of fellow travelers, and they searched far and wide to locate esoteric knowledge related to these questions. And from their search, he noted that people had largely lost the capacity to deeply experience, perceive, and understand life. And he aimed to restore this capacity. So he set up schools where students studied the temple dances, which he had discovered preserved in hidden sanctuaries of the world, mostly in the East. And it was one of these dances that I had witnessed when I was 17, which brought me to the Claremont School of Continuing Education in West Virginia to study more. And the hallmark of these sacred movements, very much in line with today's reading, and it was that they required one to be present in mind, heart, and body. They demanded more of each person than it seemed one could muster, causing a struggle within the self that produced a great deal of energy. And then there was a tendency to blow the energy off in one's habitual ways. And observing this in oneself and each other over and over again brought one to understand human nature differently and to want to learn to use this precious energy for inner work. So, for a glimpse of this, when you have a chance, you might watch the movie Meetings with Remarkable Men, which contains a scene of one of the movements. And Renee, if you could show just about a minute of your clip from that movie.
We can read of truths placed there many thousands of years ago. I understand.
Hard to tell from looking at it what it demands of you internally, but yeah, the visuals do, I hope, do help. A very different Sufi dance practice, inspired by the Shisti Sufi path, was developed by a man called Sufi Sam. And he developed the dances of universal peace, bringing the Sufi teachings to the hippies of San Francisco in the 1960s. Um, this may have been, this was my day and age. It may have been yours as well. These are dances that are done in a circle, and they celebrate the unity of religious ideals by calling on the divine in the many names and forms of used by the major religions and other faith traditions as well. Today, these dances are practiced by Sufi groups and other groups in nearly every country in the world and have helped to inspire tolerance in many places. On Oahu, we've done this practice for many, many years. Actually, was brought to the islands by Yaxan Valdez, a wonderful teacher from Chile. And now, of course, I'm not leaving them anymore on Oahu, but hopefully when the pandemic settles down, then John Sacedo, my co-leader, hopefully will continue that tradition there. And generally there are musicians on Oahu, a guitarist and a drummer, who help support the experience musically. And on each occasion, the words, the music, and the simple movements for the dances are taught. And that is Sufi Sam in the middle. He's the one who initiated the dances of universal peace in San Francisco. And then the third dance tradition I'd like to share about is the Mevlevi tradition, the whirling dervishes. And the Mevlevi order was founded by the son of the great poet and Sufi teacher Rumi almost 800 years ago in Konya, Turkey. Now, in Rumi's time, their very civilized way of life was being threatened by the Mongols, naked warriors on horseback, brutally ravaging and pillaging the countryside. And so Rumi's family migrated. And as they traveled, Rumi studied with the great Sufi teachers of the time. And after the family settled in Konya, he became a professor like his father. And one day, Shems of Tabriz came to the city to find Rumi. And in a very famous interchange, that great mystic Shems asked potent questions of Rumi, which opened his heart and mind to mysteries way beyond what he had yet realized. And so began a marvelous friendship between the two. And together they ascended to heights of spiritual realization beyond the ken of those around them. Some of Rumi's students became jealous, they drove Shems away, and eventually, it seems, they killed him. And Rumi was thrown into deep grief over the loss of his friend. This tragic grief birthed a transformation in him that completed his becoming the greatest poet and Sufi teacher known to the Persian and Arabic speaking world. He speaks as directly to our hearts today as he did almost 800 years ago. And in the beautiful whirling ceremony of the Mevlevis, the participants enter and they sit on white sheepskins on the floor, listening to a prayer sung and listening to the ney, an unusual sounding reed flute that expresses a human spiritual longing, resounding back to Rumi's longing. By listening to the beauty of the music of praise and longing, all present attune to the manifestation of the divine. And the ceremony is called Mukabale, which means greeting face to face. The participants rise after listening and they begin walking in a circle, turning around at certain points to look into each other's faces, inwardly beholding the divine in each other. They wear a tall hat representing a tombstone and a long, loose black robe, the grave. You can see some of the robes in the corners there in this interesting lens that was used to take this picture. And then after this walk, they suddenly remove their dark cloaks, revealing this long, white, bright tunic. And as they begin to whirl to the orchestra's music, the skirts of their tunics open like flowers. They turn to the left towards their hearts. It's the day of resurrection when we all return to God. And it might appear when you're watching the ceremony that the whirling, who are whirling are in a trance state, but actually they must remain acutely aware of their bodies, of the others present, the room, the complex progression of the music, while constantly repeating the name of God in their hearts. And this requires that they be present, that they be conscious in all aspects. And in this state, with the full intention and wish to experience the divine presence, they hope to reach a level of purification that's needed for this. And if there is an audience present, they become altogether so quiet. There's a heightened feeling of purity and love that pervades the room, and all sit together in contemplation in this beautiful space. So now, what can I share with you about dance as an integral part of a spiritual life? Rumi, the great poet, said, "Let the beauty we love be what we do." There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. The Sufis teach through their presence. They may also teach through the creative arts because baraka, or grace, pouring through them, it naturally takes creative form. Rumi wrote down the first 18 lines of his magnus opus, but the rest of the approximately 25,700 verses were recited, and much of it while he whirled. And it was all written down faithfully by his students. It was a tremendous outpouring of wisdom in poetry, intricately woven out of stories, prayer, and commentary, all in rhyme and meter. So the Sufis experience that behind all existence, there is a hidden secret that wishes to be known. And this is hidden inside each of us. Searching out this secret is the beginning of the Sufi path. It's about a deep knowing that we can uncover within our lives, a blossoming from within. There's no dogma about it. It's a wordless experience. If we look at the lives of the Sufi saints, we find that they have made use of certain tools that were issued to us too in this life. No matter what walk of life we're born into, we have capabilities that open onto a field of possibility of recognizing and celebrating the divine presence. So what are the tools we find we've been given to discover ways to recognize and celebrate the divine in manifestation? Well, the body must have some use in our task. We'll come back to that. This space that we move around in, and all the people and things within it. Our voice, both the voice within and the voice that goes out into the world. Our personalities that we quickly become coated with in this life, and expanse of time. These are some of the first obvious tools that we discover. With body, space, time, and so on, the dance of life begins. Using these tools, it emerges that we are, in a quite ordinary way, transmitters and receivers of thoughts, of feelings. What more? Like when a very loving person enters a room, it changes how we feel. What do we have the potential to transmit and to receive? And as through a glass darkly, we begin to perceive that we bear markings in a way. We are calibrated, just as, say, a measuring cup is. and we begin to search for what can help us understand what are we calibrated for. When we ponder these questions of purpose, of what the human being has been specially constructed for, we may begin to feel something in us stir, may even feel the beating of wings in our chest. And an essential inborn tool is our longing. This spiritual longing in us is our compass. As Rumi says, let yourself be silently drawn by the stronger pull of what you truly love. We navigate by this longing that never stops. And the Sufis have found that one of our inborn tools is indeed the heart. And if we polish the heart, we can see so much reflected in it. A prophet has said, God, who cannot fit into the entire universe, nevertheless is contained in the heart of the true believer. To polish the heart, glimpse the divine there. My teacher used to say, they say there is a polish for everything in this world, and the polish for the heart is remembrance of God. So many of the tools we've been given turn out to be useful for polishing this tiny mirror, this door to the infinite. We practice remembrance of God through service to others, through prayer of various kinds, through contemplation, through struggle with the raw ego. One of the ways we practice remembrance of God is through singing and dancing. And the scriptures of the world's great religions teach us that from all created beings and even the tiniest particles of creation, there is praise continuously rising up, streaming toward the One. Science, in its own way too, observes the whirling inside each atom. If we get in touch with this praise, this turning, this inspired movement within everything, in the ancient stars of the sky that are dancing with us, within even the tiniest particles that we're made of, then perhaps the thing we can do in this life with complete congruity is to celebrate the divine presence with everything we've got, with every nerve and sinew in action. And this is the work of the Sufi, to have the prayer of the heart reflected in the living of life. Living prayer, their lips, their movements, even their smallest actions, revealing the divine presence in the world. Maybe you can take it from there, Renee, and see what discussion might come.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I almost didn't want you to stop speaking because just hearing your voice had such an uplifting effect upon me. It was almost as if you were dancing with your voice. That is really packing everything into every ounce of your being, I think. Well, I wonder, in terms of this idea of the dance of the feet or our dancing feet, what reflections or what experiences each of you have? How has it maybe enriched your life to be able to dance or to watch dancing? What does it really mean to dance? What are your thoughts? Go ahead, David. Let us have it.
Well, I was just blown away. I was thinking that Valerie could have stopped at any one of those little moments, and it was just a rich, full experience. And then it just kept flowing. And I had that same feeling, Renee, of like, that could be it right there. And then there was just more and more. It was amazing. And I'm just reading about the neuroscience behind attention. And as you were talking about observing the patterns of reactive and habitual behavior, it reminded me so much of what I'm studying about the neuroscience of attention, how that refines the mind and sort of decouples our notion of awareness so that we have these new new avenues, basically, I think where you came to at the end, that we can now become channels for this information that can flow through us in ways that a cluttered mind or an untuned piano can't play. Just blown away. Thank you, Valerie. No more words.
Thank you, David. An amazing time right now, the way the ancient mystical teachings and science, especially physics, are just converging right now, and have been for about the last 40 years or so, with the work of David Bohm that kind of really got it started. And tremendous discoveries, both in the very, very minute particles of life, as well as the vast uh, universe and the discoveries in the stars. And what goes on in our neurology is tremendous. Many people that I'm talking to are describing about how their years of meditation have um, have resulted. Partly, one of the things they're experiencing is that this part of the brain here that is connected to our instinctual responses, our reptilian responses. I want to kill it, I want to hit it, I want to eat it. That side of us, of our nature. Um, our meditations can actually create like a neural net that that supersedes that, and that holds a lot of potential for our ability as a human race to be able to continue on this planet in a viable way. Very interesting field you're bringing up.
I was reminded of tuning a piano, and when you mentioned calibration, and just that fine tuning, with the Steinway Grands, there's a warehouse full of them. Each one of them is subtly different, and the performers go and they find the instrument that's going to perform that piece. And so that calibration, it's like our lives are about calibrating us for this purpose.
Hi, Roger, old friend. How nice to see you here. It's been a long time.
Can you maybe tell us what it is that has drawn you to the kinds of dance that that Valerie has led?
Yeah, I was going to just say something about that. Anyway, I started doing Dance as a Universal Peace at the Church of the Crossroads in like 1970s when Yaksan was here. And it's just so beautiful because it's interfaith, and it comes from all the traditions, and the music, it's simple to get into. So they can teach you the dance and the song in 10 minutes, and then do 10 or 12 of them in an evening, and you just are so moved in so many different ways. It's like just turning your mind off and having an experience where you go from one feeling to the next every 10 minutes, and that really, I think, cleanses you in a way and just gets you really in touch with different parts of your body. So even though it was started out as a Sufi Islam, it's really, the dances of universal peace are much more ecumenical. I guess interfaith is a better word, but I have really enjoyed it. I like to dance, and I like the words that, when you dance, you look in other people's eyes, and, namaste, see the God in them sees the God in you. It's very Buddhist. It's very much similar in the depth of it and the ability to connect with another person. The zikrs that are strictly Sufi are just very meditative. And we used to do one up at the Academy of the Pacific where you were sitting and you just chant. The zikr means you chant over and over again the same words. And the one they used to do was, if I ever forget God for a moment, please forgive me. And so that kind of just on and on, works into you. And then you go from sitting to moving to standing to twirling. So I just found it a wonderful spiritual religious practice. in different ways with both of the things that she was doing here.
Yeah, we have the ecstatic dances with Krista Heiser, which are essentially Nia-based, so they aren't just completely free form. They do have a bit of structure to them, which I actually appreciate. Simple.
But this is more a group participation. The ecstatic dance, of course, is you're by yourself and you're getting into it that way. But this is as a group, holding hands sometimes, having partners, and just have a strong, loving feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think that our use of Zoom um, was so limited by our conceptions and our capacities when this pandemic started. But I'm noticing more and more that people's capacity to connect with each other over Zoom has really grown over the last 3 years. And I think this is part of one of the miraculous things that the pandemic has brought, that, what they call the rainbow bridge. Two birds can sit on branches on opposite sides of the forest, sing to each other. It's as though they're right next to each other. There's no the physical distance is not a problem, and I think people have been learning something about that through Zoom meetings. But of course, it's not the same as being in a circle, holding hands, and dancing together. When my sacred dance teacher from the Gurdjieff tradition came to visit Hawaii, um, and he saw the hula, he said, "If I lived here, this is the sacred dance I would be studying." Yeah, he very much appreciated hula and its incredible rich spirituality, embodied prayer. I see there's a message in the chat from Carol Ann who says, "This is a magical discussion and I love the feelings of being transfixed by a topic, and dance is becoming my love language to myself."
Robert Moore.
Yeah, I just wanted to express my appreciation as well. I I didn't want you to stop talking either. I have no questions. I just want to hear you talk. It's like listening to a beautiful piece of music. You really don't want it to end, okay? So thank you very much, but
Robert, do you think that there is some similarity, though, of your practice of surfing and for somebody else, the practice of dancing? I mean, it seems to me that there's something very spiritual in your practice of surfing and communing with the divine through nature.
only in the sense that it's a total mystery to me. It's just mysterious. I mean, to go and catch a wave and why, that's an extraordinary experience. Because just watching it, it's okay. But when you're on a wave, it's different. So that's what I mean about, I was amazed that you could talk, because you can talk about the experience of movement and something about what that experience is like. That's really remarkable. Like some painters can talk about their paintings, others can't. But there is something very mysterious about communion through movement.
There is something that is wordless that we cannot express. And if someone hasn't experienced something about this, then there aren't any words that I've been able to find that make any difference. But if a person has experienced standing before a sunset and feeling that connection with all, or whatever whatever it is we're talking about here, if they've some people experience it in nature, others in relationships. I mean, different people have their portal onto this experience that the Sufis call unity, and others have other names for that. You know, I think most people can, if they really look at their experience, they can find something in their background that connects with this. And from that, something can open. But if it wasn't in us to begin with, I think these words would just fall on deaf ears. And so I so appreciate being with people who are capable of listening and attuning and entering into something together in that.
You know, I feel as if we are such multi-layered beings that when we have something that is engaging to us on many of those levels of our being, so it is engaging us physically, it's engaging us emotionally, our mind is involved. Like you were saying, the Sufi whirling dervishes are not in a trance. They have to stay very mentally present, right? And then there's that whole spiritual aspect of ourselves that becomes activated. It's kind of like all the tumblers in the lock line up, and then we can open up and get through the door. And to me, that's part of the wonder of doing something that has a physical aspect to it, that causes the physical not to be in our way. So many times our physical nature is just getting in the way of being attuned. But when we use our physical nature in a very specific way, that it becomes fully engaged with all these other layers of ourselves. I think it is something remarkable, and that can happen in different kinds of practices, but certainly when we are inviting in the divine deliberately, then that highest, most profound aspect of ourselves can really do its work, perhaps.
Yes, so beautifully expressed. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think I see the ocean that one person might surf expressed in your eyes, Renee, when you speak. so, so lovely, you know. This physical ocean that we can literally surf on. You know, a it's kind of a miniature version of that great ocean that goes beyond the physical realm, but can so readily bring us right back to that ocean, that great ocean. One of the dances of universal peace says, "The ocean refuses no river." Inshallah Mabud Leila. It means God is love, lover, and beloved.
I feel as if Valerie is truly a gem, in the sense that there's so many of us that are, you know, kind of like these hunks of rock that are unpolished as yet. And that she has done so much refining of her personal nature. She mentioned, I think, the raw ego that we all have to deal with. And, you know, just this honing and attuning herself. And she talked about each of us calibrating. And I get the sense of each of us having our own unique calibration. That means that we, when we are attuned to it, are able to fulfill our soul's purpose here on earth. And I think maybe that melodious voice of hers coming from that place of being very attuned is what we have appreciated so much. And all of the wonderful insight and information you've provided us with as well, Valerie. We just can't thank you enough. It was exquisite. Thank you so much. Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
Thank
Mahalo,
you.
aloha.